Derivatives trading involves substantial risk of loss and is not suitable for all investors. Past performance is not necessarily indicative of future results.
Good morning, everyone. It is Thursday, May 30th, 2024. My name is John Piranunzi, and this is the opening swing. Let's begin today, as we always do, with our news. Out of Europe, we got economic sentiment, their unemployment rate, consumer confidence, inflation expectations, and basically a few other numbers, all mostly in line, and Europe is essentially unched. So not a ton of action despite some data. Coming into our US hours, our 8:30 news driver is GDP. We also have international trade, jobless claims, retail inventories, wholesale inventories, and following that up at 10 a.m. we have pending home sales, and at 10:30 the nat gas report. We also have the petroleum status report at 11 a.m. After that, we have a few treasury announcements and a few short-term auctions. Shortly after noon Eastern time, we have Williams speaking as well, and Logan after the cash close. Also very important to note, within GDP, we get the core PCE, personal consumption and expenditures. This is an inflation gauge that the Fed looks at more than anything else. So this is what we need to be attentive to at 8:30. This will be most likely our core driver today. So pretty much everything about our plans is going to live or die potentially by this number. So let's be aware of that. Let's go on to a few charts. Looking at our weekly chart first, what has been emphasized on this chart? The bullishness we've seen in the month of May, the one-time framing higher, each week with a successive higher low until we kind of hit our former all-time high, the 33 halves, where we started to see the rounding off. And now we're seeing what is almost certain to be a 3-bar fractal high on the weekly. I mentioned that once we kind of like tested higher, broke lower, we got the red week. I was looking at the prices above 33 have to be resisted. We saw that. I mentioned that the prior week's low was vulnerable, and we've seen the break. So now we've taken that one time framing. That's done. So what's our next target with continuation lower on this time frame? On this time frame, I'm looking at the basically like 20 to 25 area, really 12 to 25. We see this area, that area was resisted here on the way up. Once we broke through, it was resistance again on an attempt higher, and then once we got through it again, it was our low here. So really specifically, this low right around the 16s, but the whole range for me from like 10 to 25 is the next key area on the way down. Let's look at our daily. Oops, got to find the daily chart. And there it is. On our daily chart here, this profile is the month of May, and here we see how bullish it was. And in the white, this white line, we see our May VWAP, which I mentioned would be a target if we breached the 50 region. 50 half, I believe, is our overnight low, so we came in just ahead of that once breaching these 64s. So the key to the key to look at this big picture, we know our monthly chart is pretty much balanced with a bullish skew, with a higher low and higher high than the prior month. We just took a look at the weekly. We see the weekly chart actually has a lower high and a lower low than the prior week. And now looking at the daily, we are trending lower on the daily. And in fact, the daily chart is one time framing lower. So that's important to be aware. But on the daily, we are starting to hit areas that I would expect some support or some slowing of the bullishness, specifically around the mid-century figure and this May VWAP, which is in the 5250 areas I mentioned. On the daily chart, if we should continue lower, this 26 to 33 area, I mentioned that yesterday. If we really started to sell, and then below these 26s to 33s, we'd start getting into the area I mentioned prior, which is all of the kind of 10 to 25 regions. So I'm expecting support if we start pushing into, if we should happen to extend lower, we also have this HVN. I'll talk about that on some lower time frame charts. Let's switch to those now. So here's our structure chart. I've switched it to an hourly just to see a little bit more on the left. So on the left here, we see the structure that I would expect support at. We have this area of structure here, which has an HVN. This profile, by the way, is also the May profile. We're seeing this HVN around 45, which when I see an HVN like that as well down here, which is a naked weekly VPOC at 52 or 52.12s, corresponding with the area I mentioned prior. This to me, these are resting offers on the way up that the buyers just ate up and continued. So what that says to me here is the last time we touched this area, the last time we touched this area, the buyers were firmly in control. So now we're revisiting these areas. So my initial expectation is that the buyers are still in control of this area. That's obviously subject to change, but initially, until I see otherwise, I would expect that the buying is still going on in these areas. That's why I'm expecting support. And my main expectation, if we are unable to get back into the prior day's range, would be a kind of some type of a grind lower and rounded bottom to form somewhere in this area. But of course, that's all very subject to how the data comes out today. Let's go on to a smaller time frame chart and do some more specific planning. Okay, here we have our 2x4 8-box chart. And let's mark out some areas that are important. Here we have our 64 region, which is really key. We'll just mark it from about 70s to 64s, which is an old weekly high. And we have our full session high up to yesterday's RTH low. Above, getting back into the prior range, we have settlement, the settlement region, and our VPOC from yesterday, which is really key. And pretty much this whole zipper region right up in here. This is very important. Why is this important? Because this is where sellers drew a line. They drew a line, and it is very clear because it's a double TPO high, which we see right there. It's marked if you're a Convergent member. This is very clear to me that this is just sellers drawing a very clear line. They have a lot to sell. They were not able to finish. They didn't sell everything they wanted to do at the 98s, and so price had to be forced lower to satisfy them. So very key area. If we should somehow get through this today above these 98s, then we're obviously looking for this 3 to 7 region, the 05s I've been talking about, above that 16s, and above that 22 to 25s, which is our area of balance above, back in that key area that we've been talking about in the daily chart. Below, we have our developing overnight low, which is the mid-century, and then below that we have those 45s I was talking about, this whole zone. 45s are an HVN. Below the 45s, we have these 32s area that I'm looking at, which really starts to get into an area that I'm expecting support down into these 32s. This whole band, 32s down the whole way to 20s. This is all areas that I'm expecting support, all of these areas, if they're touched. So anyway, what could happen today? So if we get a clear directional move away from the 64s, that would be the easiest. Let me just get rid of some of this just to make it a little bit more clear. If we get a clear directional move, I think it would have to be away from the 64s. So if we get clear direction on the bear side, obviously some type of a push lower, gets below FS levels, cannot get above, continues, takes the overnight low, then I would be looking for kind of a grind lower that just kind of gives us these deep pullbacks, stretches the range, pulls back again deeply, stretches the range, very difficult trade. I would expect some type of rounding off to happen, likely in likely around the within these 40 to 54 area, some type of stretching of the range lower. And this could, depending on, again, the data or the context, we could see this revert higher back into the overnight range. If it gets above the 64s, then we could see it go bullish. But for any kind of a bearish action that can't get above the 64s, I would expect it to be a grind like this. There's also potential for this grind to see a more aggressive push lower that breaches the overnight low and gets a little bit further. If we see something like that, a more aggressive push, we might see the grind happen ahead of the 32s. So it might be a similar action just happening at lower prices. And still, this would be very vulnerable, as I've said, to any type of a impulse or reversion higher. They can get back in the overnight range or get above FS levels and start working higher. So for me, I'm expecting excursion lower to be a grind if we get it, if we get excursion lower. I could obviously be wrong about that and we could just fall out of bed. But for me right now, I'm expecting excursion lower to be a grind. What happens if we go higher? So for higher prices, we could easily see higher prices happen with some type of an initial test lower, like we're just trading around here, the open happens, we impulse, trade lower, we take out the overnight high, and then see some kind of a zipper. Kind of, as I said before, a quick test, but then a reversion. But the key for me, like I said, 64s are the key area. So if we get above 64s in any way, shape, or form and hold, then I'm looking for the overnight high, which is 73s. If we then get the overnight high and we still hold on pullbacks, I'm looking for the gap to close, which is yesterday's low, and then settlement, which would be a key target for me above. If we hit settlement today, what happens if we revert higher and we hit settlement? Like we somehow get up here. My initial expectation, if we hit settlement, would be some type of a push. We have our 2-day VWAP here and our naked VPOC, would be some type of a push higher and then a rounded top up here. And then I would expect potential for a reversion lower, potentially back out of range, that then continues and gets some kind of basically tries higher, but then ends up failing and closing lower again below yesterday's low. So I'm expecting with any push above settlement, I'm initially expecting resistance. That could be wrong if obviously we push into settlement and we hold this key area, these 84s. If instead we get into this area, let me clean some of this up. If instead we get above these 84s, this area, this zipper region, if we get above this area and hold, that would be a big change for me if we were able to hold this area and move higher to take the 98s. Holding settlement, we're looking at the 98s as the next key target. If that gets taken today, I'll be surprised. But if it happens, it would be significant, and I would expect for sure, or not for sure, but I would say there's a pretty good chance if we break the 98s today, we'll get the push into Century and 05s and get this red area. If we get past this, it would be a complete change of the environment for me. So I'm not necessarily expecting it. It could certainly happen with this number, but that would be sort of the key. So let's go over that. Well, one other thing we should say, this 64 area, if, like I said, I'm expecting resistance on initial tests up to settlement. I'm expecting resistance there. I'm expecting support on any initial tests below the 45s or really below the overnight low. So I'm really looking at this area from 45 to 84. This 40 point, I'm thinking that we could do a lot of trading within this area. And if we don't move away from this area, it could end up becoming chop. We could see a test up to around this area, a test down to around this area, and then end up chopping. If we move below these 40s, then obviously we know our targets. If we move above these 84s, then we know that this is the key target. And within this area, it could be fairly rangy with the 64s as kind of my key area. If we hold below 64s, we're looking for overnight low and then potentially this area. If we break above it, we're looking for the gap 73s, then gap close, and then potentially settlement. Settlement, I would expect resistance. If I'm wrong about resistance, then these 98s are absolutely key, one time framing price and our double TPO high. If we fail to make either of these tests and just kind of chop around, it could be messy. So that's what I'm seeing for today. These are the important areas. This is kind of how I'm preparing for the ES trade today. I really want to note, however, though, that the data today will be pretty important and it could change the environment. So you should have your news wires on and be aware of it. But that's what I got for you today. I hope it is helpful in some way, shape, or form. The big pieces that we should remember are the larger time frame charts and how we're starting to see a bit of a shift in what has happened. We're seeing the weekly chart sort of balance out. We're seeing the daily start to trend lower. So we should be aware of all these changes. We should know what areas are important, and really key areas today, like I said, the double TPO high, settlement, yesterday's low, which kind of corresponds with our overnight low, 64s overnight, and overnight low, developing overnight low. So that's what I'm seeing today. I hope everyone has a great morning going on. I hope everyone can continue that and have a good day and improve your trading in some way. And of course, I hope that in some way, shape, or form, you can make someone else smile today, because that's really what's most important. So let's wrap it up here. Let's get out there and clock some ticks and be ready for that 8:30 number, which is 15 minutes away. So let's be ready, guys. Best of luck to everyone. I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.